There are some things in English that just don't translate. Not because you don't know the word, but because the feeling behind it, the cultural context is different. And sometimes when something doesn't translate, people start to question themselves. They ask themselves things like, am I being rude? Did I do something wrong? Why does this feel off? Hello, you wonderful people. Welcome to English Right Now. My name is Roy, your British English teacher, and I've been a teacher of English for nearly 15 years. And over that time, a lot of my students' questions, they go beyond language. They have questions about culture, about life in the UK, and how to adapt. And of course, I am talking specifically about life in the UK because that's where I live and I am a British English teacher. Now, this lesson is all about culture, but you may be aware that there are some words and expressions which don't really translate into English. For example, false cognates or false friends like embarazada in Spanish, which means pregnant, looks like embarrassed in English. That's not really the focus of today, but these are sort of words that maybe we'll talk about in another lesson. And likewise, I always say that idioms don't really translate. So, for example, you have kick the bucket in English, which means to die. So, if you say informally, oh, he's kicked the bucket, it means to die. But there's a very similar one in Portuguese, which is chutou balde, which basically means kick the bucket, but it's kind of giving up a certain thing or a habit. And it's very, very different. I will say that kick the bucket in English is the ultimate form of giving up, it's dying. But this isn't really the kind of thing that we're looking at in this lesson. We're talking more about culture. So, let's talk about a simple truth. Culture isn't identity. Culture is a code. It's a code for context. When you combine language codes and cultural codes, that is when connection happens. And in British culture, we often favor less direct interactions. So if you are too direct with a British person, maybe in your culture, you are more direct, and being direct is the proper way to be. It could cause a culture clash with British people. Now, on this channel, I've talked a lot about why why British culture tends to favor less direct interactions, certainly in certain circumstances. And that comes down to the idea of negative face. Negative face is this idea that we help people save their kind of social standing, social protection by being less direct. So negative face favors an interaction which basically doesn't put too much pressure on the listener. And the simple truth is, if you are too direct in British culture, you could offend a British person. Now, I'm going to tell you some ways to make your English less direct towards the end of the lesson. But this talk about culture clash and the cultural codes, I learnt this very much through my wife, Luciana. She's Brazilian. I'm British. And we share the same universal values. We share the same things like kindness, honesty, and respect. But the way that we express those values can be totally different in certain situations. In Brazil, being kind might mean speaking directly or emotionally. These are her words. And in the UK, kindness often looks like being more subtle, understated, or even a bit self deprecating. And this is where many immigrants or English learners feel a bit torn. You ask yourself, if I adapt to the culture, am I betraying who I am? Let me say this clearly. No, you are not. You're not betraying your identity by learning a new culture code. You're only betraying yourself if you break your universal values, those things like kindness and honesty and respect. My values might be kind, be respectful, be honest, express myself, but set healthy boundaries. Now, in Brazil, and I love Brazil when I lived there, being polite might mean offering people food multiple times. I used to go to people's houses and they would just keep insisting that I had food. They wanted to feed me. I swear they wanted to make me bigger. I love it. And that was part of them showing politeness. In England, though, politeness might mean asking once and respecting that person's no. You might get you sure? Okay, fine. But that's about it. It's the same value, politeness, but just a different code. And it's like this. You wouldn't behave in a nightclub the same way you do in a supermarket. That doesn't make you fake, it just means you understand the context. So, in Brazil, I used to eat pizza with a knife and fork. That's the kind of done thing. Here in the UK, I use my hands. Guess what? I didn't betray my culture. I didn't say, no, I have to eat it with my hands. I just read the room. I understood that that was part of their cultural code. It's not about pizza. It's about presents, although I do love pizza. Absolutely do love pizza. You can let me know your favourite type of pizza in the comments. So, I promised you, I said about British culture, we favour less direct interactions. The idea of that negative face, and I've talked about this on the channel quite extensively, but the idea that we are helping somebody to maintain their social balance by maintaining a little bit of distance, giving autonomy to the listener, and also respecting that idea of not putting too much pressure on them. So how can we be less direct in English? Well, first of all, I'd say use of less certain modal verbs. So instead of things like must, I could use something like might have to. Instead of something like will, may. These sort of things. So less certain modal verbs is a really key way to kind of sound less direct. You could also use opposites, negative opposites of adjectives. So rather than say something is bloody awful, you could say it's not great. So you're using negative, positive adjective rather than just being directly negative. We also tend to use hedging language. So in things like could be, might be, maybe, these kind of things. We don't really deal in absolutes. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. Yes, I had to get a Star Wars reference in there somewhere. But basically what we're saying, we don't deal with 100% certainty. We kind of seem like we're not entirely sure, even though we are. We also tend to ask open questions. So for example, at work, asking an open question rather than a closed question could help you kind of maintain a healthy level of communication. So rather than say something like, is this project good? You could say something like, which would get a yes or a no, by the way. You can ask something like, what do you think could make this project a little bit better? An open question creates more discussion, and it doesn't seem to trap the listener into a very binary response. We also tend to use hypothetical speaking, so things like it could be said, it could be seen. I often joke that more words is less direct, but there is a certain element of truth there. Adding some extra words can really, really help. And I'll tell you now that this lesson has actually been sponsored very much by my wife. We're going to talk about that in a second. But also one thing I would also be very mindful of is intonation. Almost show a kind of hesitant way of speaking at times. Like, I'm not sure that's quite right. But why did I say this lesson was sponsored by my wife? Well, recently we opened up places on our course, the Ultimate British Pronunciation Guide. And we've also got 2 other courses as well, the Ultimate British Slang and Idioms course and a cultural course about life in the UK. And just recently, as I say, my wife takes a lot of messages, and some people would send her messages like, send me the link to the course. Send me the link to the course. No, please, no, thank you, just send me the link to the course. And for my wife, who is very aware of British culture, simply said, I understand that this person doesn't want to be rude, they're just being direct to avoid a miscommunication. However, because of your culture, I understand that that would be quite rude. So how would we reword that rather than send me the link to the course? How could we reword that? Well, first of all, I would add a please at some point, but something like, would it be possible for you to send me the link to the course, please? Would be much more, it would be seen as much more polite. It's wordy, it's less direct, but would it be possible? Now, you probably know that, yes, we are going to send you the link. Would it be possible? But that gives an element, a lack of pressure on the listener. And this is what being indirect is all about. Things like adding that, would it be possible for you to do this? No rush, things like this. Doesn't have to be right now, really adds it. And I have got a lot of students on my course who send me things like that, and I absolutely love it. They're not changing the sense of their own values. They want to be polite, but they're just doing it in a way that lands in a kind of British way, and that's what they're there for. They are learning British culture, British English, and modern British RP pronunciation. And I'll have to say, they are absolutely wonderful human beings. Now, one thing I will say is it's not about sort of having your boundaries disrespected. It's not about changing your boundaries. This is merely about expressing yourself in a way that is less direct and potentially less rude for some British people. You can still have the same boundaries. You can still say no, we just do it in a slightly different way. Let's give you some kind of practical examples that you may see. At work, you've worked on a project. If somebody comes along and says, this project is awful, that's really direct. A British person, I can feel myself already getting tense. A British person would naturally sort of tense up a bit and get ready for conflict. And I always say that British people are quite conflict averse, especially in places like the workplace. So instead of saying the project is awful, you could say this project isn't the best at the moment. So there you go. You've got that positive thing. It isn't the best at the moment. It isn't the best. So it's not saying it's awful. It's just saying it's not 100% perfect. Now, that may mean that it's awful, but that's literally what we're trying to say. It isn't the best at the moment. And again, at the moment gives that idea that things could change. It's again about less pressure. My wife also said that she believes there's room for improvement. This is a classic British phrase. But yeah, there might be a bit of room for improvement. In other words, this needs improving. But you don't make it sound like it's 100% awful, even if that's what you think. It's about creating a safe space for an indirect conversation. And in fact, this kind of lesson goes both ways. Because on the one hand, if you work in a British company with a British boss, and your British boss says, this project isn't the best, we might need a little tweak here and there, you may misunderstand and think there is only a minor thing wrong with it. That British person is just speaking less directly. So you still need to understand that that could actually mean that this project is wrong. It needs work. It needs a major overhaul. But it's all about context. So this can go both ways. So this lesson will teach you, number one, how to understand what a British person is saying when they're talking less directly. But it also shows you how to communicate back with them in a way that's not going to create any kind of conflict. If somebody asks you to do something, instead of saying, no, I can't, why not say, that might not be possible, or I'm not sure I can do it at this point. So there you're not saying that you don't want to do it, or you definitely 100% can't. You're just saying that it might not be possible at the moment. I'm really sorry, it might not be possible at the moment, or I'm not sure that's possible right now. And finally, as I said, only Siths deal in absolute. If you don't know what a Sith is, think Darth Vader. But this is a problem, is 100% direct, and could sound much politer if we say it could be a problem. So you're not saying it's definitely a problem. You're saying it could be a problem. So the next time you feel like something doesn't translate, pause and ask yourself, take a breath. What is the cultural code here? Can I respond in a way that honors my values, but also respects this context? Those are the two questions you need to ask yourself. You can be kind, you can have boundaries, and you can express yourself. You can be you and still connect with people in a way they understand. And if you are interested in learning more about this kind of thing, about the slang and idioms, the expressions that we really use, and also about life in the UK, how we really think, what we really do, these things like negative face, and these things about why sarcasm is not only a form of humor, it's a way of life. We have a very special thing coming up. This Thursday, we are launching for a very limited amount of time, just a few hours, one day. We are launching or opening places on our courses, the Ultimate British Slang and Idioms course, and also on our culture course, What the British Say versus What We Actually Mean. If you are interested in either of those, there is a link in the bio to join an exclusive WhatsApp group, which is where we send you links with a huge discount. If this lesson resonates with you, if you've ever felt like you've been lost in translation, not because of words, but because of the meaning, leave a comment and let me know. This is a safe space. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.